Bueno, buenas noches, ingenieros, a los que se encuentran conectados a la clase del día de hoy. Gabriel, Sandro y Julián.
Hola, buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Bueno, el día de hoy vamos a continuar aún en nuestro módulo 2. Vamos a ver los dos últimos temas que vamos a ver en el módulo 2, que están relacionados con las redes inalámbricas. Recuerden que el módulo de seguridad, conceptos de seguridad LAN, es indispensable que lo vean solos. Conceptos de redundancia de primer salto no es requerido, pero se recomienda que lo vean. Y configuración de switch, pues de una u otra manera ya lo hemos visto. En ese orden de ideas, vamos a mirar nuestro capítulo 12 de configuración o conceptos LAN. Entonces, en nuestra sección 12.1.1, beneficios de una red inalámbrica. Básicamente los beneficios de una red inalámbrica están representados y más que todo en la movilidad. Es decir, ya no estamos fijos a un punto de cable, sino que podemos transitar a lo largo de la oficina, del campus universitario, de la casa o de la pequeña empresa. Otro de los beneficios es la facilidad de mover la infraestructura. Algo de esto ya habíamos hablado. Si yo tengo una red inalámbrica y necesito trasladarme de oficina, pues hago la pequeña instalación que involucra los puntos de acceso inalámbrico y el resto de los equipos pues tendrán conectividad inalámbrica siempre que estén en el área de cobertura. A diferencia de si yo tengo una red cableada en la cual me toca al trasladarme de oficina, invertir en recableado, canaletas, conectorización y no tengo conectividad hasta que no haya hecho todas esas adecuaciones. Ahora, ¿qué tipos de redes inalámbricas hay básicamente? Vamos a encontrar redes inalámbricas WPAN o Wireless Personal Area Network o redes inalámbricas de área personal, que son redes que generalmente tienen un alcance reducido entre 6 y 9 metros. Dentro de esas redes vamos a encontrar las redes conformadas por los dispositivos Bluetooth, por dispositivos IoT como los Zigbee y básicamente son ese tipo de dispositivos. Este tipo de redes están descritas en el estándar 802.15 y generalmente operan en una frecuencia de radio de 2.4 GHz. Generalmente porque actualmente hay de este tipo de redes que operan en otras frecuencias. Las LAN inalámbricas o las wireless LAN. Las wireless LAN básicamente son el protocolo de la IEEE o el estándar de la IEEE 802.11 y operan en la banda de 2.4 GHz, 5 GHz y hasta los 6 GHz. Están operando. La distancia de estas redes oscilan entre los 50 metros hasta los 150 metros. Pero al igual que todas las redes inalámbricas, a mayor distancia o mayor ocupación de la red se va degradando o el rendimiento de la red o la cobertura de la misma. Redes de área mediana o metropolitana inalámbricas son redes que están diseñadas para proveer un área geográfica relativamente grande, mucho más grande que lo que eh, abarca una LAN. Estas son generalmente redes que se utilizan para cubrir áreas geográficas como veredas, corregimientos, pequeñas ciudades o áreas de ciudades. Y las W-WAN o WAN inalámbricas son básicamente redes de cobertura global, pero que funcionan a través de tecnologías inalámbricas. Ahora, ¿cuáles son las tecnologías que nos permiten cada una de estos tipos de redes? La más utilizada para las redes de área personal es el Bluetooth, que como vimos anteriormente está cubierta o descrita en el estándar de la IEEE 802.15 y básicamente es una red que en la actualidad, las últimas versiones, tiene un alcance ya no de 6 a 9 metros como estaba descrito en el estándar, sino incluso de 100 metros. Estas redes generalmente son redes que se encuentran en dispositivos como laptops, teléfonos celulares, tabletas y Smart TVs incluso. Tenemos dos tipos dos tipos comunes de dispositivos para estas redes Bluetooth. Tenemos los dispositivos de baja energía o BLE que admiten redes en forma de malla para tener coberturas a gran escala, es decir, ir formando como una especie de celdas, muy similar a lo que pasa con las redes celulares, como una especie de celdas que conforman una malla y pueden cubrir un área geográfica amplia por la unión de varias dispositivos de esto. Y tenemos la velocidad básica o velocidad mejorada, los VR o EDR de Enhanced Device Radio. Tenemos que estas son tecnologías que admiten conectividad punto a punto, se hacen pareja punto a punto, ya no en una malla, y básicamente están optimizados para la transmisión de audio. Es lo que utilizamos en nuestros famosos audífonos Bluetooth. WiMAX. WiMAX es un tipo de red ya de red de área incluso metropolitana inalámbrica. WiMAX significa interoperatividad mundial para acceso por microondas. WiMAX es un estándar de la IEEE, el 802.16, que está enfocado en funcionar similar al WLAN, es decir, similar al wireless que nosotros utilizamos en nuestra casa, pero con unas antenas y unos radios especiales que pueden alcanzar distancias de 50 kilómetros y trabajan de punto a multipunto, es decir, hay un punto central que hace las veces de access point, por llamarlo de alguna manera, y ese access point puede atender múltiples antenas de clientes conectados. La comunicación es bidireccional, pero se necesita línea de vista de microondas, es decir, debe haber visibilidad entre el equipo, entre la antena del cliente y la antena del punto de acceso. El ancho de banda celular. El ancho de banda celular es una manera muy común de acceso a Internet en la actualidad y básicamente está soportado ya como ancho de banda celular en las redes 4G y 5G. Anteriormente, en las redes de tercera generación y hacia atrás, podíamos tener conectividad de datos celulares, pero por las velocidades que se manejaban no se consideraba como un servicio de ancho de banda celular. A partir del 4G ya podemos hablar por las velocidades que se manejan, que son en promedio unos 20 megabits, en promedio lo que ofrecen los operadores, podemos hablar de ancho de banda celular. Hay dos mecanismos de control de acceso al medio o dos tipos de redes celulares, por llamarlos de alguna forma, muy comunes, que son la GSM o Global System for Mobile y el Code Division Multiple Access o CDMA. En Colombia, por ejemplo, conocimos primero el CDMA que el GSM. El GSM lo vinimos a conocer en Colombia a partir de la tercera generación de las redes celulares, que cuando aparecieron los operadores con sus famosos 3 GSM. El CDMA lo conocimos porque es un protocolo o una tecnología que se usa principalmente en Estados Unidos y nosotros en los tiempos en los que adoptamos la tecnología celular, al igual como lo hicimos con la televisión en sus inicios, no me refiero a la televisión digital, me refiero a la televisión análoga, el formato de televisión análoga, adoptamos el de Estados Unidos. Lo mismo pasó en la telefonía celular hasta que evolucionamos a las tecnologías GSM. Y la banda ancha satelital o el satélite broadband, la Internet por banda ancha satelital o la banda ancha satelital es un servicio que es un poco más costoso que la banda ancha celular, es más costoso que el WiMAX, es más costoso que todas estas redes de área amplia o de cobertura extensa de Internet, pero es una solución bastante aceptable para aquellos sitios donde no hay una mejor opción. A ver, la banda ancha satelital, a pesar de ser una buena opción para sitios apartados, no es una buena opción si tenemos a nuestra disposición, por ejemplo, fibra óptica o cable o cualquier otro tipo, o incluso hasta el mismo WiMAX. ¿Por qué? Porque la banda ancha satelital se ve afectada por factores climáticos, aparte de que el costo es mucho más alto que las otras modalidades de interconexión. Ahora, en cuanto a la WLAN, ya vimos que está especificada en el estándar de la IEEE 802.11, pero ese estándar de la IEEE 802.11 para las LAN inalámbricas, es decir, para la doméstica y pequeña empresa o incluso para las LAN inalámbricas corporativas, tiene varias revisiones o varias versiones. Tenemos el 802.11 que trabaja en una frecuencia de 2.4 GHz y tiene velocidades hasta 2 megabits. Son los inicios de las redes inalámbricas. El 802.11a trabaja en la banda de los 5 GHz, velocidades de 54 megabits, áreas de cobertura pequeñas, generalmente unos 30-40 metros efectivos. La especificación decía que podía trabajar en unos 50 metros, pero en realidad a más de 40 metros ya presentaba problemas. Es menos efectivo penetrando estructuras de construcción y no es interoperable con las especificaciones 802.11b y 802.11g. 802.11b, banda de 2.4 GHz. El problema de esta banda de 2.4 GHz es que la WLAN no es lo único que funciona en esa banda de 2.4 GHz y que muchos dispositivos emiten simplemente ruido en frecuencias muy cercanas a la banda de 2.4 GHz, como las lámparas fluorescentes, algunos motores, teléfonos inalámbricos. Bueno, los teléfonos inalámbricos no emiten ruido, pero funcionaban en la banda de 2.4 GHz. Algunos hornos microondas generaban ruido en la banda de 2.4 GHz. Eso afecta no solamente a la 11B, sino a todas las que operan en esta banda. Ahora, esta banda 11B, o este estándar, perdón, 11B, manejaba velocidades de 11 megabits. Tenía un mayor alcance que la especificación 11A y tenía como mejora que las ondas de esta implementación de WLAN eran mucho mejor atravesando muros que las de 5 GHz de la especificación 11A. La 11G, a ver, y como dato curioso, a partir de la 11B empezamos a confiar en las redes inalámbricas, es decir, empezó a implementarse la conectividad inalámbrica ya como una opción real. Las dos primeras opciones no fueron muy acogidas. 11G, ya esto tuvo una mejora en términos de velocidad. Ya no manejábamos velocidades de 11 megabits, sino velocidades de 54 megabits. Y es compatible con versiones anteriores, con la 11B, con capacidad de ancho de banda reducido. ¿Qué quiere decir? Que si usted ya había comprado sus dispositivos inalámbricos que funcionaban en la banda B y ahora implementaba una red inalámbrica o en el estándar G, perdón, en 802.11g, este dispositivo que permitía conectividad inalámbrica en 802.11g iba a ser compatible con sus dispositivos 11B. Ahora, a esto se le conoce como modo mixto, cuando permitimos dos estándares o tres estándares diferentes o más en un solo dispositivo de conexión, que en nuestro caso sería un access point o un punto de acceso inalámbrico, que para las redes inalámbricas es lo mismo que un switch para las redes cableadas. Este modo mixto tiene como ventaja que me permite utilizar los dispositivos antiguos, o sea, los antiguos que yo había adquirido. Como desventaja que cuando estos dispositivos funcionan en modo mixto, trabajan a menor velocidad, es decir, el rendimiento se degrada. 802.11n, el estándar N o la variante N del 802.11. Esta ya puede trabajar en los canales de 2.4 o de 5 GHz. Las velocidades varían de 150 a 600 megabits con un rango de distancia de 70 metros, es decir, ya tenemos un poco más de cobertura y tenemos una velocidad un poco más alta. Es compatible con los estándares 811A, B y G. ¿Por qué es compatible con el A? Porque trabaja en frecuencias de 5 GHz. Nuevamente tenemos el mismo problema. Si habilitamos el modo mixto para soportar los otros estándares, vamos a tener una reducción en el rendimiento de la red. 802.11ac, 5 GHz. Proporciona velocidades de hasta 450, perdón, 450 megabits hasta 1.3 gigabits o 1300 megabits, utilizando tecnología MIMO. MIMO es la abreviatura de Multiple Input, Multiple Output, es decir, tenemos múltiples entradas y múltiples salidas y esto se logra a través de tener diferentes antenas para transmisión y recepción, tanto en los dispositivos inalámbricos como en los puntos de acceso. Se pueden soportar hasta 8 antenas y es compatible con los estándares A y N. Compatible con los estándares A y N porque trabaja en la banda de 5 GHz, este no trabaja en la banda de 2.4 GHz. Y por último tenemos 802.11ax que trabaja en las bandas de 2.4 y 5 GHz. Es básicamente, bueno, el último estándar a 2019 hasta ahora. A 2019, también conocido como el HEW o High Efficiency Wireless o inalámbrico de alta eficiencia. Es el que más velocidades maneja, mayor capacidad, maneja muchos más dispositivos conectados, tiene mejoras en el consumo energético y tiene capacidad de trabajar entre 1 GHz y 7 GHz utilizando frecuencias cuando están disponibles. Para obtener más información de esto, podemos buscar en Internet Wi-Fi o sexta generación. Ahora, estamos hablando de bandas de frecuencia. Esas bandas de frecuencia, ¿qué es? Son básicamente la capacidad que tenemos para modular señales en el espectro radioeléctrico. Nosotros, nuestras señales inalámbricas funcionan en la banda entre 2.4 y 5 GHz. Y aquí tenemos pues un pequeño gráfico que nos muestra el espectro radioeléctrico y tenemos ondas de radio, ondas infrarroja, ultravioleta, rayos X y rayos gamma. De aquí de la medida central, luz del sol, luz de algunas lámparas, hacia adelante, lo que es ultravioleta, rayos X y rayos gamma son señales potencialmente peligrosas. De aquí hacia atrás, las señales de microondas, de satélites, de ondas de radio, de wireless, se ha hablado mucho, pero no se ha demostrado que sean nocivas para la salud. O sea, demostrado no está. Que lo sean, pues no lo puedo descartar. Ahora, todo este tema del espectro radioeléctrico y los estándares para la transmisión eléctrica, para la transmisión por el espectro radioeléctrico, está regulado por la Organización Internacional de las Telecomunicaciones, por el IEEE, que es el que básicamente formula los estándares de transmisión inalámbrica, y por algo que se llama la Wi-Fi Alliance. Pero la Wi-Fi Alliance tiene objetivos ya no científicos ni tan técnicos como la ITU o como la IEEE. Esto es básicamente una organización que se encarga de promover el uso y la estandarización y el crecimiento del Wi-Fi. De hecho, ellos tienen como unas características que deben cumplir los dispositivos y colocan una certificación que corresponde a este loguito que tenemos allí, el loguito de la Wi-Fi Alliance. Componentes de una red inalámbrica. Vamos a ver este video para establecer cuáles son los componentes de una red inalámbrica.
Hello everyone, we are here to talk about wireless LAN components. And with wireless LAN components, I've got a table full of items to bring up. To get started, let's start with the end device and the network device you're connecting to. An end device is going to have a transmitter, receiver, antenna inside of it. Here we have a laptop. And when the laptop screen is open, that antenna is right up here at the top of the laptop screen. Gives you better signal strength and connectivity. That's going to be an integrated internal antenna up there. In comparison, what if you're running a desktop computer and maybe your desktop computer doesn't have wireless? Well, what you can do is purchase a card like this that would connect to your motherboard, and with that card, it can have an external antenna off the back of your desktop tower. This antenna is known as a dipole antenna. It's omnidirectional, but we'll get to that later on. Now, besides antennas like this that are going to be literally integrated into your motherboard by purchasing and installing, you can also purchase USB antennas. For example, there's an internal wireless antenna inside of this, and it's got a USB cable that would plug into your machine. There's also other variants where we have a USB adapter with a wireless antenna built in, and again, it's got a little dipole antenna there for omnidirectional wireless coverage. So that's going to be our end devices that are going to interconnect with now the network devices. And with these network devices, one of the common items we'd see is the wireless router. And the wireless router here is going to provide network connectivity for those end devices as they want to communicate. Now these wireless routers commonly have three functions. Those three functions being, number one, a switch built in. For example, I've got a set of blue ports here. There are 4 of them. That's an integrated switch in this wireless router. You plug your wired devices into that switch. Why? Because the wireless router has another function, which is function number 2, and that would be an internet port, which is the function of default gateway/router. The function means we're going to be able to send our wired network traffic and wireless traffic out to a different network or infrastructure. That could be the internet, for example, off of that internet port. The third and final function of this wireless router is we have internal integrated antennas in this wireless router, which allows us to connect our wireless end devices. There's other wireless routers that are out there too. For example, like this one, it does not have internal antennas. All the antennas are external, but same thing. Switch built in, internet port as default gateway, and wireless services provided. So as we talk about these wireless routers, what are they going to do on the wireless side of the house for us? Well, this wireless router is going to be broadcasting what's known as a beacon. And a beacon is going to include the SSID, which is a service set identifier. That is the name of the wireless network you want to connect to. So when you're looking on your phone or looking on your laptop and you click refresh for those wireless networks, it's going to see the SSID, which is the wireless name of the router. These wireless routers also do association and authentication, and what that means is when you refresh and receive that beacon, not only will you get the wireless name, but you're also going to see the security standards and wireless standards supported by that access point or wireless router. That allows you to associate and authenticate successfully and communicate with those wireless devices. Let's dive in a little bit deeper now. We have the wireless router covered, but what if you want to deploy many wireless devices on your network and extend wireless range? One of the first things people like to say is go with a range extender. A range extender can only do so much regarding distance and also doesn't scale well. The other solution is to deploy a wireless access point. Looks just like a wireless router. The wireless access point has one major function, and this is one network port on the back. It's not running as a switch. It's not running as a default gateway. The wireless access point is going to connect to your wired infrastructure and connect wireless devices using its antennas. These are awesome. There's 2 classifications we want to get into. We're going to have autonomous wireless access points, where each wireless access point you deploy requires full configuration by you. Imagine having 100 of these to provide network and wireless access across a big business. That would take a while. There's a other solution to go with besides autonomous, and that's called controller-based. With controller-based access points, they're commonly called lightweight access points. These access points, they again have maybe 1 or 2 ports. This one has 2, a primary network port and a backup in case the primary goes down. But these lightweight access points that are controller-based do not require individual configuration of each access point. You configure a wireless LAN controller, a WLC. And when you configure that controller and you plug these into the network that the controller is on, the wireless controller will configure and manage all of your lightweight access points. Another version, of course, is this big beefy Cisco one right here. Same thing. Deploy 10, 20, 30, hundreds of these wireless access points. They are controller-based, which means they're all managed and configured by the wireless controller without initial configuration. Doesn't scale so well? Scale's awesome. So last but not least, let's hit some antenna types. I mentioned we get to it. We have all these wireless devices, and we hit this already. These are those dipole antennas, which provide 360 degrees of coverage. They're awesome when you're talking about rooms and small areas of hallways, but they're not going to go long distance. So So if you want to go long distance, what we'd focus on is something more akin to this. And these type of antennas are not omnidirectional. These type of antennas provide directional-based coverage. There's different versions like Yagi and parabolic, some that look like radar dishes. They're meant to target longer range distance with wireless technology. So these are our wireless LAN components. Take your time and study and read and have some fun.
Listo, chicos. Ahí escuchamos un término que era el término beacon, que es lo que envían los dispositivos intermediarios inalámbricos como el access point o el router inalámbrico. En español, eso lo podríamos traducir como baliza. Esa baliza o ese beacon es una señal con la información necesaria para conectarse o para asociarse con la red inalámbrica. ¿Listo? ¿Alguna pregunta acerca de los componentes inalámbricos?
No, señor.
Ok, perfecto. Entonces vamos a ver acá.
Hello everyone, let's jump into wireless LAN operations. This is wireless local area network operation. And to get started, we need to talk about two different types of modes. We're going to hit infrastructure mode and then we're going to hit ad hoc mode. First, with infrastructure mode, we're focusing here on a wireless network that's connected to wireless devices. But that wireless network connected to those wireless network devices is hooked to a wired distribution system. What that means is our wireless router is connected with a wired Ethernet cable down into our infrastructure. That infrastructure of these other two switches here will then carry that traffic on to the router and to the local PCs. You're literally connecting your wireless router with a wireless device, and that wireless router is then having a wired connection to your distribution system. Let's switch over to ad hoc mode, much more basic. And with ad hoc mode, we're talking peer-to-peer. We've got two devices connecting wirelessly without any network infrastructure, without any wired distribution system. A good example of this would be having two phones and literally having two phones directly connected to each other, maybe sharing a file using technologies with Bluetooth or AirDrop, 802.11 coming into play there. But that would be ad hoc. You do not have an infrastructure device. It is directly device to device, known as peer-to-peer. Lastly, you could toss this in as like a extra mode, but this would be tethering. And with tethering, this is where you have a cell phone or a tablet with cellular data access connecting to cellular internet. But that cellular device is also running as an access point. We would call that as a hotspot. So while the cellular device itself is having a connection to the internet, it is also creating a wireless signal for wireless PCs, wireless tablets, and other devices to connect to the phone or tablet that's running cellular as a wireless router. From there, our devices that do not normally have cellular data access, they can connect through that cellular data device, and that's called tethering. It really is similar to ad hoc, where we're going to be using a peer-to-peer from our, let's say, laptop or from a non-cellular data device with this cellular device, and then that cellular device itself will connect out to the cellular data network. So it's time to switch it up a little bit. We're going to need a couple new terms here like BSS and ESS. So let's dive right in. BSS is Basic Service Set. And Basic Service Set is where we talk about providing wireless access to small deployments. A Basic Service Set will include a BSA, known as a Basic Service Area. These yellow bubbles, for example, are basic service areas. That is the extent of the wireless signal that is possible to connect to with that access point that we see here. The BSS ID is the Basic Service Set Identifier, and that's going to be the layer 2 MAC address of your access point you're connecting to. So here's one access point, and that's the BSS ID, which is what you'd be connecting to inside of your basic service area with a laptop in that signal range. Here's another signal range, or a BSA, Basic Service Area, and there's a separate access point, and that access point has its BSS ID. That's the formal way that we recognize the access point, which again is the layer 2 MAC address of that access point. Now the thing is, this doesn't scale. And if you're talking about larger networks and scalability, we're going to flip over here to the ESS. With the ESS, known as the Extended Service Set, we're going to have one huge, large area of coverage. And that large area of coverage that we're going to be seeing here is going to be based off of having multiple BSAs, or Basic Service Areas, deployed. But they're deployed in such a manner that they're all connected to one single wired distribution system. So we have multiple access points, each access point having its BSS ID, with devices connecting to those access points, and those access points being connected to that wired distribution system. And the cool thing about this is it promotes roaming, which means this user over here on the far left side in this BSA can take their laptop and walk over into another office and hook to another access point on the same wired distribution system. And with roaming, it would be seamless for that user. They don't have to disconnect from one wireless SSID and connect to another one. It will be seamless. So let's continue on through our conversation. As we connect to these access points, what do we have to worry about? Well, usually don't have to worry about this, but at least it's something to learn. And that's called 802.11 frame structure. We're not going to rip it apart, but we can talk about it. This 802.11 frame is similar to what we've seen in 802.3 Ethernet, and that's frame, but we've got more fields. We've got here frame control, duration, multiple addresses, sequence control, and then even an address for it. What it comes down to is we have to concern ourselves with how our devices are going to be connecting to an access point or a wireless router, and that might be the middleman in our conversation to eventually have this traffic reach a web server on the internet like Cisco.com. So we have this middle device to work through. Well, how do we do that? Well, with these different fields inside of this frame structure, we can use things like address 1, where address 1, for example, would be the MAC address of the receiving wireless access point. Address 2, for example, would be the MAC address of the transmitting wireless device, like your cell phone or a tablet or the laptop you're on. Address 3 might even be the gateway device. This might be the router that's going to be the default gateway of the network. Think of all the different devices that your wireless client will have to get through to eventually leave its local area network when you're referring to having wireless and this wireless technology in the middle. We have control sequencing and fragmented frames coming up in the sequence control. Address 4 could be used in our ad hoc modes. In frame control, we have to worry about power management and subfields for different protocol versions and frame types. And finally, don't forget this big, huge area of payload. Payload is the data of your transmission. And then FCS for our frame check sequence, that's your error control. So all this comes into play to help us connect out with our wireless end devices. And speaking of wireless end devices, feels like there's a constant battle because everything is going wireless and it all wants to fight for bandwidth. Well, how do we gain access with many wireless devices to a single wireless access point? Well, there's a technology that's going to help us out, and that's called CSMA-CA. CSMA-CA is Carrier Sense Multiple Access Collision Avoidance. And really what this means is we're not going to allow traffic just be colliding into each other, flying through the air as all these different laptops and smart devices are trying to interconnect across an access point. We have a better way to go about it. With Carrier Sense Multiple Access Collision Avoidance, if you slow that down and speak it a couple times, that's really what's about to happen. What do I mean by that? Carrier Sense. We're going to listen to the wireless media. Multiple access. We have many devices that want to use the same media at the same time. Collision avoidance. We're going to make sure they don't all ram signals into each other and then corrupt that signal. So what does that mean in the most basic sense? We're going to have our wireless devices listen to the wireless channel and see if it's idle. See if there's no other traffic currently on that wireless channel. That channel is just called the carrier. We're then going to have the RTS. Your end device, your computer, your PC, the laptop, the tablet, it's going to send a RTS. And this is a ready to send message. That message will be heard by the access point. And the access point can then provide dedicated access to the network. Well, how does the end device know that the access point is ready? The access point will respond to that RTS, the ready to send. It'll respond to it with a clear to send, a CTS. It says, the dedicated access is ready for you. Go ahead and send. When the wireless end device hears that, it's going to then send and transmit its data. And by the way, all of our wireless transmissions are going to be acknowledged. And if the wireless end device does not receive an acknowledgement back, then it knows there was a collision. And it's going to restart that entire process back from listen. In order for us to first communicate with a wireless network, though, we do have to associate with a wireless access point or wireless router. And all associating means is we need to agree on specific parameters being used by these wireless network devices, as in the wireless access points or wireless routers. So how it works is this. Our device is going to try to communicate on a specific SSID, which is your wireless network name, with a password, and then using a specific network mode. For example, the wireless router or wireless access point might be supporting 802.11a, b, g, n, ac, or ad wireless LAN standards. Your device has to agree to use that standard in order to communicate with said wireless router or wireless access point. Now, some wireless routers and access points can support multiple standards at the same time, and that's known as mixed mode. Besides agreeing on the mode to use, your wireless end device also has to agree on the security, and that could be your WEP, WPA2, WPA, along with the encryption standards of TKIP or AES. When you have agreed on using the correct one with the access point, hey, those are agreeing on parameters. And lastly, we have radio frequencies, which are our wireless channel settings. We need to make sure that we have an appropriate channel set with our wireless router and wireless access point, and our wireless clients will connect on that. When all that has been done, then we can successfully say we've associated with a wireless access point. Now, when we talk about associating with wireless access point, it's usually very easy. You go on your wireless client, you'll click refresh to see the wireless networks nearby, and you'll hear about them. You'll hear about the name of them, which will be the SSID. You'll hear about the standard supported, which will be the 802.11 standard used. And also you'll hear about the security settings in place that access point or wireless router requires. All of that's being provided via a beacon. The default, standard, easy access wireless mode is known as passive. In passive mode, wireless routers and access points are on time intervals from sending out beacons, and the beacons includes all that information. But there's another mode, and it's called active. And in active mode, our wireless client, well, there's an issue here. The wireless client isn't going to hear a beacon being sent by default by an access point. And what needs to happen in order for a wireless client to successfully access the wireless network is we have to manually configure the SSID and the supported standards on the wireless client. And when the wireless client has the wireless network name on it, which is the SSID, and it has the correct standards to use configured on it, only then are we able to gain access to that wireless router or wireless access point. So the easy way, that's passive, that's the default. The more difficult way of connecting to network would be using the active mode. So take your time, read through the material for wireless LAN operation, and enjoy picking up some awesome wireless skills.
¿Alguna pregunta acerca de lo que acabamos de ver del funcionamiento de las WLAN?
No, señor.
Ok, listo. Ahora, vamos a ver el funcionamiento de CAP-WAP. Vimos en el primer video de dispositivos inalámbricos que tenemos unos access points, que son access point autónomos, y tenemos otros access point, que son access point ligeros. Los autónomos requieren que usted configure manualmente todos los parámetros en cada access point. Eso es fácil si tiene 1, 2, 3, 4. Pero si tiene 100, hacer esa configuración en todos los access point puede ser dispendioso, poco escalable e incluso inseguro. Para eso existen los access point ligeros o los lightweight access point que dependen de otro dispositivo que se llama el controlador inalámbrico o el controlador de access points. Esa comunicación de control que debe darse entre los access point ligeros y su controlador es a través de un mecanismo o un protocolo que se llama CAP-WAP. Eso es lo que vamos a ver en este video.
Let's discuss CAP-WAP, control and provisioning of wireless access points. CapWAP is an IEEE standard protocol that enables a wireless LAN controller to manage multiple access points and wireless local area networks. CapWAP is responsible for the encapsulation and the forwarding of wireless LAN client traffic between an access point and a wireless LAN controller. CapWAP is going to establish tunnels on the UDP ports 5246 and 5247. This is with IPv4 and with IPv6. CapWAP will also provide additional security with DTLS encryption, which is Datagram Transport Layer Security. A key component of CapWAP is the concept of split media access control. With this, we're going to have the functions normally performed by an individual access point distributed across two functional components. The first functional component being the access point MAC function. That's going to be handling the beacons and probe responses, packet acknowledgements and retransmissions, frame queuing and packet prioritization, and MAC layer data encryption and decryption. The wireless LAN controller function is going to be authentication, association and reassociation of roaming clients, frame translation to other protocols, and the termination of 802.11 wireless traffic on a wired interface. Next is DTLS encryption, the Datagram Transport Layer Security encryption. DTLS is a protocol that provides security between the access point and the wireless LAN controller. This allows them to communicate using encryption, and it prevents eavesdropping or tampering from those man-in-the-middle attacks. Now, DTLS is enabled by default to secure the control channel for CapWAP. This is disabled by default, however, for the data channel. What that means is all CapWAP management and control traffic exchanged between the access point and the wireless LAN controller is encrypted, and it's secured by default. However, data from the clients moving between an access point and the wireless LAN controller is not encrypted by default. CapWAP data encryption is optional, and it would be enabled per access point. It requires a DTLS license to be installed on the wireless LAN controller prior to being enabled on an access point. FlexConnect is a powerful wireless solution for branch offices and remote office deployments. This is going to allow you to configure and control access points in a branch office, which could be a remote office, controlling it from the corporate office through a WAN link, a wide area network. And you could do this without deploying a wireless LAN controller in the office with the access points. Now, there's two modes of operation for the FlexConnect AP, which would be the access point in the branch office. The first one is connected mode. In a connected mode, the wireless LAN controller is reachable. That's reachable across the wide area network. And with this, there is CapWAP connectivity where we can send traffic through the CapWAP tunnel, and the wireless LAN controller performs all the CapWAP functions like we discussed earlier with split MAC. In standalone mode, the wireless LAN controller is unreachable. The FlexConnect access point has lost or failed to establish the CapWAP tunnel with the wireless LAN controller. In this mode, that FlexConnect access point can assume some of the wireless LAN controller functions, such as switching client data traffic locally in the network and performing client authentication.
¿Dudas acerca del video que acabamos de ver? Bueno, canales de frecuencia. Resulta que los dispositivos LAN inalámbricos tienen transmisores y receptores que son como los sintonizadores de cualquier aparato de radio o de televisión y están sintonizados a frecuencias específicas de ondas de radio que les permiten establecer una comunicación entre ellos. Comúnmente estas frecuencias se asignan como un rango, no como una frecuencia específica, y los rangos pueden estar divididos en pequeños rangos llamados canales, es decir, hay un rango, la banda de X cosa dividida en N canales. Si la demanda, es decir, si la ocupación de un canal es demasiado alta, es probable que ese canal se sature y la saturación de un medio inalámbrico lo que produce es la degradación de la calidad de la comunicación e incluso la pérdida de conectividad. Hay diversas técnicas que han evolucionado junto con las redes inalámbricas para mejorar el uso de la comunicación, el uso de los canales inalámbricos. De esas técnicas tenemos la DSSS, la FHSS y la OFDE. ¿En qué consisten? La DSS es espectro de extensión de la secuencia directa. Bueno, esperen un segundo. Direct sequence es secuencia directa de la expansión del espectro. Esto básicamente es una técnica de modulación que está diseñada para esparcir una señal sobre un rango de frecuencias en una banda. La técnica básicamente fue desarrollada durante la guerra para hacer más difícil a los enemigos interceptar las señales de comunicación. Es básicamente esto, es una señal que tiene esta forma que estamos viendo aquí, pero se expande a través de la banda de frecuencias. El salto de frecuencia sí, el salto de frecuencias básicamente se denomina esto. Y es salto de frecuencia a través del espectro. Esta básicamente eh, básicamente se basa en métodos para comunicarse a través de los canales. Cuando se está dando la comunicación en un dispositivo a través del espectro de frecuencia, se producen saltos, es decir, un dispositivo no está transmitiendo y recibiendo exclusivamente en un canal, sino que cada dispositivo y cada comunicación va saltando en los canales a través del espectro de frecuencia. ¿Esto con qué fin se hace? Con el fin de propender o de procurar una mejor utilización de los canales, que no haya ningún canal que se sature en un momento dado, porque como todas las comunicaciones están haciendo saltos de canal, estos canales normalmente van numerados, canales del 1 al 11, por ejemplo, son canales comunes. La comunicación la tengo en el canal 1, salta al canal 3, salta al canal 10, salta al canal 7. Entonces, como los saltos no son iguales para todos los dispositivos, se disminuye la probabilidad de saturación de un canal. Y tenemos, aquí sí vamos a volverlo al español, y tenemos la multiplexación por división de frecuencias ortogonales. Básicamente es un conjunto de es un subconjunto de la multiplexación por división de frecuencias en el que un solo canal utiliza múltiples subcanales en frecuencias adyacentes. ¿Qué quiere decir? Un canal se divide en múltiples subcanales en frecuencias contiguas. ¿Con el objetivo de qué? Con el objetivo también de dividir el tráfico. OFDM son precisamente ortogonales entre sí, lo que permite que los subcanales se superpongan sin interferirse. OFDM es utilizado por varios sistemas de comunicación, incluidos el 802.11a, G, N, AC y el nuevo 802.11ax, que utiliza una variación de esto que se denomina acceso múltiple por división de frecuencias ortogonales o FDMA. Selección de canales, y aquí sí viene la parte, digamos, un poquito más importante de este asunto. A ver, nos dice la diapositiva. Una práctica recomendada para las WLAN que requieren múltiples puntos de acceso es utilizar canales no superpuestos. Esto es ¿cómo se llama? La parte importante aquí. Por ejemplo, los estándares 802.11b, G y N operan en el espectro de 2.4 GHz a 5 GHz. En la banda de 2.4 GHz está dividida en múltiples canales y cada canal tiene un ancho de banda de 22 MHz, como lo vemos aquí en la figura. Tenemos 5 MHz de separación entre cada uno de los canales, o sea, entre el canal 1 y el canal 2 hay 5 MHz de separación, pero el canal tiene un ancho o un rango de 22 MHz. ¿Esto qué significa? Que el canal 1 está superpuesto con el canal 2, está superpuesto con el canal 3, está superpuesto con el canal 4, está superpuesto con el canal 5, pero no con el canal 6. Tampoco el canal 6 está superpuesto con el canal 11. Entonces, ¿cuál es la recomendación aquí? Que si nosotros tenemos áreas de cobertura que se superponen, y esto es normal hacerlo, ¿para qué? Para poder tener movilidad sin interrupciones, es decir, que yo pueda caminar de esta área de cobertura o Basic Service Area a esta Basic Service Area o a esta otra sin tener interrupciones. Esta cobertura debe estar en canales eh, o la intersección debe estar en canales no superpuestos. ¿Para qué? Para que la señal de un access point no interfiera con la otra. Si yo tengo el canal 1, el canal 6 y el canal 11, estas áreas, a pesar de que cuentan con la señal de los tres access point, por ejemplo esta, cuenta con la señal de los tres access point, en realidad la señal de uno y otro no va a causar interferencia porque los canales no están superpuestos. Listo. Lo mismo aplica para los canales en la banda de 5 GHz y por eso en la banda de 5 GHz, por ejemplo, debemos mirar canal 36, 48 y 60 no son canales que se superpongan. Canal 36, como vemos, tiene superposición con el canal 40, con el canal 44 sí tiene superposición, pero con el canal 48, si lo miramos acá, el canal 48 ya no tiene superposición con el canal 36. Y el canal 60 tampoco tiene superposición con el canal 48, como lo vemos en la figura. Y hay algunos tips para la planificación de las redes inalámbricas. Las recomendaciones para planificar nuestras redes inalámbricas se resumen en los siguientes puntos. Si los AP van a utilizar cableado existente o si hay ubicaciones donde no se puedan colocar APs, tenga en cuenta las ubicaciones en el mapa, es decir, la intersección de las señales de los APs con la consabida recomendación acerca de los canales. Tenga en cuenta todas las fuentes potenciales de interferencia que pueden incluir hornos microondas, cámaras de video inalámbrica, luces fluorescentes, detectores de movimiento o cualquier otro dispositivo que trabaje en el rango de 2.4 GHz. Esto si estamos trabajando en 2.4 GHz. Si estamos trabajando en 5 GHz, pues deberíamos consultar la documentación sobre todo de dispositivos, porque las luces fluorescentes y los hornos microondas generalmente no van a generar ruido en 5 GHz. Coloque los AP por encima de las obstrucciones, es decir, es mala práctica colocar los APs, por ejemplo, encima de escritorios. Coloque los AP verticalmente cerca del techo o en el centro de cada área de cobertura si es posible. Coloque los AP en ubicaciones donde se espera que estén los usuarios. Por ejemplo, una sala de conferencias es mejor locación para una AP que un pasillo. Y si se configuró una red IEEE 802.11 para el modo mixto, los clientes inalámbricos pueden experimentar velocidades más lentas de lo normal al admitir estándares inalámbricos más antiguos. Entonces, la recomendación ahí es que ojalá estandarice sus equipos. Si estoy trabajando en banda N, banda N, banda X, a X. Si estoy trabajando con equipos en el estándar G, que sean todos estándar G. Es mejor que utilizar modo mixto. No se degrada tan fácil la señal. Ahora vamos a ver amenazas en la WLAN. ¿Dudas hasta este momento?
No, señor.
Ok.
As we dive into wireless local area networks, we need to describe the threats to our wireless LANs. And to get started, a wireless LAN is pretty much open to anyone within range of an access point. And if they have the appropriate credentials to associate with that access point, they are on the network. Now, these attacks, they can be generated by outsiders, disgruntled employees, even unintentionally by employees inside of your company. And they don't even have to physically enter the workplace to gain access to the wireless local area network. There's many different types of wireless attacks that can happen, one of them being interception of data. Your wireless data, it should be encrypted at all times to prevent it from being read by eavesdroppers, people who shouldn't have access to that data. Wireless intruders are unauthorized users that are attempting to access network resources, and you know what? They can be deterred by using authentication. Denial of service attack is a little more difficult. They try to access your wireless local area network services, then compromise them either accidentally or on purpose. We also have our rogue APs, which are unauthorized access points that are installed by either a well-intentioned user, someone just wanted to have an extra wireless network close by, or installed for malicious purposes, and they want to be able to intercept people's traffic. Using management software, we should be able to detect those rogue access points. How do denial of service attacks happen on wireless? Well, they can happen because of things like improperly configured devices. Configuration errors can disable a wireless network. For instance, an administrator, they could accidentally disable the network with a disable button. Or even an intruder with administrative privileges could intentionally disable the wireless local area network. Now, another DOS attack is where a malicious user intentionally interferes with the wireless communication. What that means is a malicious user has a goal, and their goal is to overwhelm the wireless access point to such a point where no legitimate devices can access it. There's tools for mobile devices for this, as well as specific radio frequency blocking tools. Accidental interference, we all know it can happen. Our wireless local area networks, they're prone to interference from other wireless devices. And these devices can be things like microwave ovens, baby monitors, cordless phones, and even more. The 2.4 gigahertz radio frequency, that is the most prone wireless band for interference. So how do we minimize this risk to denial of service? Well, we're going to harden our devices and keep our passwords secure. We're going to use backups in order to come back online as fast as possible. And also, any changes that we're rolling out on our network, they should always be done off hours, not during a production environment time frame. A lot of this interference that can happen, as mentioned, is on the 2.4 gigahertz band, so let's move our devices to the 5 gigahertz band if it's possible. Rogue access points are the detriment of wired network security. A rogue access point is an access point or wireless router that has been connected to a corporate network without the explicit authorization of the company. This is completely against company policy. Anyone with access to the physical premises can install a very inexpensive wireless router or access point and allow themselves access to the secure wired network resource. Once connected, these rogue APs can be used by an attacker to capture MAC addresses, to capture data packets, and even to gain access to wired network resources. They can be used to launch man-in-the-middle attacks as well. To prevent the installation of these rogue access points, organizations have to configure wireless LAN controllers with rogue AP policies, as well as they should use monitoring software to actively monitor the radio spectrum for unauthorized access points. With a man-in-the-middle attack, a hacker is going to position themselves between two legitimate entities in order to either read or modify the data that passes between those two entities. Now, there's many ways that a man-in-the-middle attack can be created. A popular way is to use the evil twin access point attack. And this is where an attacker is going to introduce a rogue access point. They're going to configure the rogue access point with the same wireless SSID as a legitimate real access point nearby. Locations offering free Wi-Fi, such as some coffee shops and airports and restaurants, they're popular spots for this type of attack to occur because they usually have open authentication. With open authentication, a password is not needed when you're going to access the wireless network. Now, connecting wireless networks would see two access points offering wireless access. The people near the rogue access point would find the stronger signal and probably connect with it. Once that user traffic is sent through the rogue access point, that data is captured and then it's usually forwarded to the legitimate access point. The traffic returning back from that legitimate access point will then be sent backwards to the rogue access point. It's going to be captured by the malicious user and forwarded out to that poor, unsuspecting user. This allows the attackers to steal user passwords, to grab personal info, and to even gain access to the user's device. Defeating these man-in-the-middle attacks depends on the sophistication of your wireless local area network infrastructure and also the vigilance that you use to monitor activity on those wireless local area networks. It all starts with identifying legitimate devices on the network, and after you have the legitimate devices being known, the network can be monitored for anything that looks abnormal.
Vamos a ver en este video algunos mecanismos para establecer para establecer implementaciones de WLANs seguras.
Wireless signals can travel through windows, walls, ceilings, and floors of your office building or of your home. Without using stringent security measures, a wireless network can be as open as a wired network jack on the outside of your building. So let's talk about some of the ways that we can secure our wireless local area networks. Two of the options that are from the early 802.11 wireless phase would be using SSID cloaking as well as MAC address filtering. Some wireless access points and wireless routers allow you to disable the SSID beacon frame, which means if a wireless client does happen to make its way close enough to your wireless signal, they still have to manually configure the SSID in order to connect to the network. Even though a wireless client receives a strong enough signal and may know the SSID of the wireless network, they can still be manually permitted or blocked from accessing the wireless network because of their MAC address. A wireless administrator can specifically permit or deny a wireless client from accessing the wireless network by using a list of approved or denied physical MAC addresses. Although SSID cloaking and MAC address filtering will stop most of those wireless clients that shouldn't be able to join your network, they won't stop all of them. Our crafty intruders can still easily discover the SSIDs of your access points, even if your access point is set to not broadcast it. And also MAC address filtering, crafty intruders can spoof their MAC address and still gain access to the wireless network. So the best way to actually secure a wireless network is to use authentication and encryption systems. We have two types of authentication that were introduced with the 802.11 standard. We have open system authentication and shared key. With open system authentication, this is perfect when you want to have free internet access in a cafe or a hotel or even a remote area. With open authentication, a wireless client can easily connect to the wireless network without having to use a password. With shared key authentication, we have a mechanism such as WEP, WPA, WPA2, and WPA3 to authenticate and also encrypt data between the wireless client and the access point. The concern here is that the password must be pre-shared between both parties to connect to the network. Within the shared keyed authentication methods category, we've got 4 different techniques available. We have WEP, Wired Equivalent Privacy. It sounds great, but this is one of the original 802.11 specifications, and this was designed to secure wireless data using a static key. What that means? It's not very secure, and WEP is no longer recommended and should never be used. The next one is WPA, which is Wi-Fi Protected Access. And Wi-Fi Protected Access was based off of the original WEP standard. It secures data using a stronger TKIP encryption algorithm, but still is not the best way to go. WPA2 is the current industry standard for securing our wireless networks. This uses AES encryption, Advanced Encryption Standard. It's currently considered the strongest encryption protocol. Last, we've got our WPA3, which is our latest and greatest security method. It disallows outdated legacy protocols and uses PMF frames, Protected Management Frames. Devices with WPA3, they're usually not readily available at this time in the market. Along with our authentication, we have encryption. And encryption is the method of us being able to protect our data. Even if an intruder has captured encrypted data, they still would not be able to decipher it in a reasonable amount of time. WPA and WPA2 standards use the following 2 encryption protocols. We have TKIP and we have AES. TKIP is used by WPA, and it provides support for legacy wireless local area network equipment. Now, TKIP addressed the original flaws of WEP, wired equivalency, but TKIP still is not as strong as AES. AES is the encryption method used by WPA2. It's the preferred method because it's a far stronger method of encryption. Now, when data is encrypted, people would have to literally capture that data and break through the encryption in order to get to the original data. So what should we use deploying a house wireless LAN? Well, first off, we're going to go with WPA2 authentication. We want the strongest authentication, which is WPA2 using AES encryption. However, we have two choices for WPA2 authentication. We have personal and we have enterprise. With personal, this is intended to authenticate devices using a pre-shared key. Our wireless clients, whether they be tablets or smartphones or Blu-ray players or TVs, will use the exact same wireless password as any other client in the house. There's no special server needed to deploy WPA2 Personal. With WPA2 Enterprise, however, this is where you have a Radius server, a remote authentication dial-in user service. This server is going to be a little more complicated to set up, but it does provide you a great amount of security. On this server, you will have multiple users configured, and these users will have a username and password combination. This Radius server would be consulted by any wireless infrastructure device that a user tries to connect to. If a person on their laptop tries to connect to the wireless access point or router would consult the Radius server to make sure those credentials were correct. WPA2 Enterprise was designed for enterprise business environment, but it still can be performed in a house. So how crazy can it get? Well, deploying a Radius setup is not too crazy. It's just getting some of the basics down. When you do authentication in the enterprise and you have a Radius server, we have to make sure that our wireless access point or wireless router can reach the Radius server. And that means our wireless access point or wireless router has to know the IP address of the Radius server. Also, because Radius is running on the server itself, our wireless access point or router has to be able to target the port numbers that the service is reachable on that Radius server. The common port numbers are 1812 for Radius authentication and 1813 for Radius accounting, but these can also operate using ports 1645 and 1646. On top of that, we want to make sure that we actually have a legitimate device asking if username and passwords are correct against the server. And to do that, we have the shared key. The wireless router or access point will have a shared key configured on it, which will be the same key configured on the Radius server. As requests from our wireless router access point hit that server to ask about user and password accounts, we want to make sure that we actually have those legitimate sources of requests. So regardless of how you deploy a wireless local area network, you've got the basics of how you can keep it secure.
Why wouldn't you connect? Don't you know this is the server room?
¿Dudas acerca del video que acabamos de ver? ¿Ninguna?
No, señor.
Ok, vale. Vamos a ver cómo configuramos una red inalámbrica doméstica y luego vamos a ver cómo configuramos una red inalámbrica corporativa básica con un controlador y una red enterprise con un controlador y un servidor Radius. Préstenle mucha atención a este video, que este video es el que nos muestra cómo hacer este laboratorio.
Hello everyone, it's time to get our computer hooked up to a network. In this video, we're going to do a wired and wireless configuration using our Cisco wireless router. To start, we will connect our computer's Ethernet port using a network cable to one of our LAN ports on the back. I can take my computer's Ethernet cable and plug it into one of our LAN ports. Next, we want to get this wireless router connected to the internet. So I'll take my internet cable from my modem and plug that into my WAN port on the back. At this time, I can go to my computer's web browser and I can type in the IP address of my Cisco wireless router. If you do not know the default IP address of your wireless router, you can look it up in the documentation that came with it. Or you can use some command line tools on your user device. My wireless router has the default IP address of 192.168.1.1. I'll type it in and I'll click enter. Immediately, my wireless router asks for credentials. I will use the credentials I found in my documentation, which was a username of Cisco and a password of Cisco. Consult your documentation to find your credentials. I'll click on login. Immediately now, I can't do any configuration changes except to change the default password. The old password was Cisco, as we mentioned. I can see that there's some minimum requirements I need to follow, as well as a password strength meter down below. The password strength meter is not foolproof, but it does help you in determining password complexity. For the new password, I can type in something a little more complex than before, and I can get a password strength supposedly of strong. But again, how much do you trust these meters? They help though. With the new password selected, I'll click save. And I know it's going to work because it's going to log me out of my wireless router and require me to log back in with my new credentials. I'll use the username of Cisco and then my new password, and then I can click login. And now we can actually configure our firewall router settings. To get started, we're going to take a look at the WAN settings. That's going to be inside of our networking section, and by default we're in WAN. We can see that the internet connection type is using DHCP for our internet addressing. Also, for our DNS addressing, we have that set to automatically get that as well from our ISP, our internet service provider. If we wanted to change this to utilize a static address, we could do so. If we wanted to change our DNS servers that we're utilizing to not be from our ISP, but maybe from Cisco's OpenDNS or other servers, we could also select that here as well. Besides our WAN settings, we can go over to the LAN settings, and in our local area network settings, we can see a lot of items that we can configure. To start off here, what we can see is the local address of our wireless router. This is the default address provided by the manufacturer of my router. If I'd like to, I can put in a new value here and then click save. Besides just changing the IP address on my wireless router itself, we can change the subnet mask, which controls the network size. Also, we have DHCP server settings. By default, my wireless router is acting as my DHCP server. Down below the DHCP server settings, we can see the starting address that we're giving out to the user devices, as well as how many user devices we're supporting with DHCP. The default on my router here is 50 devices. If I'd like to have more devices on my local area network, I can increase this number from 50 to a higher value, for example, maybe 100. As we continue on looking at our settings, what we'd like to take a look at here is, what if I didn't need the DHCP server on this router? What if I had a separate server running on my network? I could use my disable radial button to actually turn off DHCP on this device. When we talk about DNS settings, right now we're getting our DNS utilizing our WAN port and receiving it from our ISP. If I wanted to change what DNS server my users on my network are using, I can use the drop-down menu here for DNS, and I can have it used as below, where I get to specify multiple DNS servers for my user devices to target. So this has been great and awesome so far, but what we want to do now is take a look at our wireless settings. I'm going to go ahead and click on wireless on the left side. I'm not going to save my changes. And our wireless screen loads up. Now inside of the wireless settings, one of the first things we'll take a look at is this enable checkbox. This says our wireless transmitter is turned on and wireless is running on this device. If you wanted to disable wireless on your device, you can uncheck that radial button and it effectively makes our wireless router firewall just a router firewall. This will disable the wireless transmitter. This would come in handy if you want this to act as a router, then you have other devices on your network that are acting as wireless access points to provide wireless coverage for your enterprise network. For us, we want to keep the wireless on so we can continue with this video. Next, in the wireless network mode drop-down box, we can select which wireless to support. If we leave the default of BGN mixed, it's going to be a slower wireless network than going with GN mixed, or G only or N only. For myself, I like to do GN mixed. I'm not going to provide legacy support for wireless B. Below that, we need to take a look at the wireless channel. We can leave this at the default of automatic, where the wireless router will determine automatically the best wireless frequency to utilize to avoid interference. If you wanted to statically set your radio frequency to use, we could do that here as well, but we'll leave it at auto. Down below, I have multiple wireless networks. I can deploy these on the wireless router all at the same time. By using the variety of edit buttons down below, I can change the wireless SSID, I can change the wireless password, I can even change the type of security for our wireless, as well as the maximum amount of wireless clients per wireless network I'm deploying. For example, if I click on the checkbox for the first wireless network of Cisco SB1, I can then click on the edit button down below. Immediately, I can change the wireless network name. Right now it's Cisco SB1. I can change this to Business Connect. Do I want the wireless name of Business Connect to be seen and visible by everybody? I can control that with the SSID broadcast button. Also on the far right, we can even control the maximum amount of clients allowed to connect, which I can change this to, for example, 40. When I'm done with these settings, I will click Save, and my wireless router is going to change Cisco SB1 to now be the name of Business Connect. Also, I'll be allowed to have 40 wireless users connected at a time. Next, if I select the checkbox for that wireless network again, and then I'll click on Edit Security Mode, it'll take me to a new screen. And in Security Mode, I can see my wireless name that I've configured, followed by the Security Mode dropdown. Right now, by default, we have WPA2 Personal. This uses the encryption of AES. This is more secure than choosing something like WPA2 Personal Mixed, which utilizes AES encryption and the legacy TKIP for backward compatibility. For us, we want the security mode of WPA2 Personal with AES encryption, which is more secure, and we will set up our password here. For example, how about this? Awesome. If you want to see what it looks like, that's my password. Now I'll click Save, and this will create the wireless password that my users will need to type in order to access the wireless name of Business Connect. With the wireless network named and our wireless password created, I go to my computer's wireless settings, and I can see Business Connect is ready to be connected to. I can click on that, click Connect, and I can put in that password, and once I hit Next, we should get a wireless network connection, and we are good to go. We are seeing this connected. We are accessing the radio frequency being sent off by my wireless transmitter on this wireless router. Now that we've completed this wired and wireless config walkthrough video, make sure you take the time to explore your own wireless router and try your hand at deploying a computer network. Thanks for watching.
Este video nos ilustra cómo cómo configurar un router inalámbrico, pero obviamente esto va a depender del tipo de router inalámbrico que tengamos. Y vamos a mirar cuál es la diferencia cuando configuramos un WLAN controller, es decir, para configurar redes con access point ligeros y un controlador.
Hello everyone, we are here to configure a basic wireless local area network on our Cisco Wireless LAN Controller. This is great. The Cisco Wireless LAN Controller, or WLC, is an amazing box that allows you to have a centralized location for configuring multiple access points and deploying multiple wireless local area networks. So let's take a look at our topology. We've got a Cisco Wireless LAN Controller off of switch 1. We have a trunk connection to carry multiple VLANs. Why would we want multiple VLANs between the switch and a wireless LAN controller? Because we're going to have one VLAN segmenting our management network. The management network is how we're going to configure the wireless LAN controller, as well as how we will communicate with our Cisco access points. Secondly, we need another network which is going to connect the user traffic from the access points to the wireless LAN controller. And this is the users on the network, their traffic. So we will see these trunk connections in between our switch and the wireless LAN controller, and then even switch into our access points to allow multiple networks to exist and be segmented on those cables. We then have router R1 over here on the left side, which also has a trunk connection, because router R1 is going to be doing inter-VLAN routing and routing between multiple VLANs, which are networks, between itself down to the rest of the topology. Also, if we take a close look, we'll see there's going to be a wireless client connected off of access point 1. Access point 1 has a link with PoE marked on it. That is power over Ethernet. Access point 1 is being powered by the switch 1 itself on port FA01. We're going to get started here. We're going to be using PCB on VLAN 1, the management network, to communicate with the wireless LAN controller and to configure it using a GUI. Let's get started. Here on PCB, we've opened a web browser and we've targeted the 192.168.200.254, which is the management IP address of the wireless LAN controller. We are crossing the switch from PCB on VLAN 1 and connecting with this wireless LAN controller so we can configure it on the management network. Since we've accessed the control already on this web page, we're going to click Login and we'll be asked for credentials. With the credentials, we're going to have a username of admin, and then we're going to have a password of Cisco123 with a capital C. I'll click sign in and we'll successfully authenticate, and here is our main splash page on the Cisco wireless LAN controller. Right now you can see that we have no wireless networks deployed. We've configured 0 wireless networks, so any access points that are joined with this controller, they have no wireless networks to share with users. We can see that one access point has joined, that is the Cisco access point of AP1 sitting on that topology screen. At this time we have 0 active clients. Nobody has joined our wireless networks because we don't have any wireless networks. So let's make one. Let's create a basic wireless local area network. So to get started, I'm going to click on Advanced. We're jumping right in. When I click on Advanced, we're going to get an overview screen of my Cisco wireless LAN controller. Here it is. You can see that we have one port plugged in, just one. That one green physical port has multiple networks because of our VLANs. We have VLAN 1, which is for management, which we're using right now on this green port. And we have VLAN 5, which is going to be for user data traffic, also on this green port. That is done through what are called VLAN interfaces. VLAN 1 has its own VLAN interface, and VLAN 5 has its own VLAN interface. Top wireless local area networks. It's empty. We've got none right here. So let's get started and make one. I'll go ahead and click on Wireless Local Area Networks. Inside of here, there's none listed. So with a drop-down set of Create New, we will click Go, and let's make one. For the profile name, I'd like to name it something like wireless_LAN. And for the actual wireless SSID that the users will see, I want to keep it the same, wireless_LAN. The ID is for me to keep myself organized. I'll leave it at the original ID of 1. When I click apply, we are not done. We have just begun. After it loads, we will see here that we have many settings to choose from for our wireless_LAN profile. We can see this is a wireless local area network. The SSID of what the users will see. We should probably turn on this wireless. That's the enabled checkbox. Let's turn on the wireless so the users can connect. We have something called interface group. Right now it's set to management. That is the management network. I don't want users connecting to the SSID of wireless_LAN and jumping on the management network where they can access and configure the controller as well as the access points. Instead, we'll select the other network that's deployed, which is user_WLAN. This would be the user traffic, which is kept separate from the management traffic. That would be the equivalent of VLAN 5. We're not done yet. let's go into the security tab and actually put a wireless password on that users will have to use in order to get on the network. We'll leave the default security of WPA and WPA2. We will leave WPA2 policy with AES. That's beautiful. But for the authentication key, I'm going to deselect 802.1x, and I want to use pre-shared key, which is PSK. I'll checkmark PSK, and it's going to ask me what password will you have the users type in. And for me, that's Cisco123 with a capital C. That's what the users will need to enter in order to gain access to my wireless. I'll click apply because we are done at this time for a basic wireless local area network. And then we're going to go back to the main home screen and verify that there is a wireless network, that users can see it, and that maybe a client has connected. So I'll click on home in the top right corner. And where before we had 0 wireless networks, now we have 1. Where there was 0 active clients, there is now 1. I can click on that active client and we can get more info about it. I can see the client's MAC address. The client has an IP address of 5.2, which is on the user network. Management network was 200. The user network is network 5.0. The client joined on the user network, and they joined on access point 1 using my WLAN profile of wireless_LAN on the wireless network name of wireless_LAN that the user saw. We have successful connectivity by deploying network settings and wireless settings on a controller and having the controller share it with the access points.
¿Preguntas hasta allí?
Profe, yo tengo la duda de cómo, digamos, yo tengo mi switch, ¿no? ¿Cómo creo la VLAN y cómo hago para que a la controladora le llegue esa VLAN y cómo sé en la controladora qué VLAN es? Porque ahí la mostró como user algo, pero
Sí,
entonces en el switch, con el switch, ¿cómo se crea?
cuando estás creando la red inalámbrica y le dices qué VLAN quieres crear. En el switch, en el switch, tú vas a crear la VLAN tal cual como la creábamos cuando vimos VLANs. Un VLAN name 5 y el nombre que tú quieras.
Ah, entiendo. O sea, yo en la controladora creo o sea, yo tengo en mi router la VLAN 20 y
En el
es la que
switch, en
estoy
el
poniendo
switch.
los datos. Sí, en mi switch.
Ujú.
Entonces en la controladora lo que hago es que agrego una VLAN y le agrego su nombre y ya
Eh,
es la VLAN correspondiente a la 20.
sí, cuando agregas la red inalámbrica, tú le dices qué VLAN va a tener.
Y cuando conecto la controladora al switch, la controladora no hay que configurarla, no sé, ¿eso va en modo troncal o acceso?
No, la controladora funciona en modo troncal. ¿Por qué? Porque a la controladora van a llegar todos los, ¿cómo se llama? Todos los datos de todos los access points y de todas las LAN que tú tengas, las wireless LAN. Y las wireless LAN tú puedes tener diversas en diversas VLANs. Entonces, por eso eso tiene que ser modo troncal, ¿sí? La conexión entre la controladora y el switch.
O sea, uno conecta la controladora y en la controladora no hay que configurar más nada, ¿sí? O sea, solamente en el switch lo coloco en modo trunk y ya.
Sí, exactamente. En el switch lo colocas modo trunk. En la controladora ya es un troncal.
Y eso, bueno, eso es cuando la controladora es aparte de los APs y ahora que en los mismos APs la controladora está, o sea, ahora el mismo AP puede ser la controladora, ¿sí? No sé si en Cisco sí pasa así porque yo he visto que en los Aruba sí es así.
No, en Cisco lo que tú tienes son que los APs pueden trabajar en modo desconectado y entonces puedes hacer ciertas configuraciones y ciertas cosas en el AP, ¿ya? Pero que el mismo AP sea la controladora, no.
Ah, ok. Sí, lo he visto en Aruba, la verdad, pero
Ujú.
en Cisco no sabía. O sea, en Cisco sí tiene que tener su controladora.
Sí, en Cisco debes tener la controladora. Y hay otros en donde la controladora es un software que tienes incluso en un computador, no tienes que tener otro equipo aparte, por ejemplo.
Pero, o sea, ese sistema también está con Cisco, ¿sí? O sea,
No, no,
conecto
no
mis
con
APs.
Cisco, otras marcas de
Ah, ok.
dispositivos inalámbricos,
Ah, sí,
¿ya?
también con Aruba. Ese también lo he escuchado.
Exactamente. Y con Ubiquiti también hay un software que te permite hacer las veces de controlador en un PC y tú simplemente tienes los access points.
Ah, vale, vale.
Listo. Chicos, vamos a hacer, a ver, como ven, esto va mucho de videos y videos. Entonces, por su cuenta van a ver los videos de la sección 13.3 y vamos a hacer este laboratorio, el 13.3.11. Perdón, el 13.3.12, configuración de Enterprise WLC. Y ahora vamos a hacer el laboratorio 13.1.10, configuración de una red inalámbrica. ¿Vale? 13.1.10, configuración de una red inalámbrica.
Y el siguiente, el anterior era el
Y el
13.2,
siguiente que
1.12.
vamos a hacer, que no hemos visto los videos, pero para no quedarnos viendo más teoría en este momento, es el 13.3.12.
13.3.12. Listo.
13.3.12, exactamente. Y ahora vamos a hacer el 13.3.10. Ese 13.3.12 me lo envían la otra semana. El 13.3.10, lo ideal es que lo terminemos hoy porque en realidad es corto. ¿Sí? Lo pueden terminar hoy y enviármelo hoy. El otro sí les doy plazo hasta la otra semana. Perdón, hasta la otra semana, hasta el fin de semana o incluso hasta la otra semana. Porque mañana vamos a iniciar con módulo 3. Módulo 3 y vamos a iniciar con el protocolo de enrutamiento dinámico OSPF.
13.3.12, ¿verdad?
Sí,
Es el de la próxima semana, 13.3.12.
13.3.12 exactamente.
Ok.
Y ahora hagamos el 13.1.10, perdón, 13.1.10. Bueno, aquí estoy por si me necesitan. Recuerden, primer punto de consulta, ustedes mismos intentan ayudarse unos a otros compartiendo pantalla por acá. Y si no, como último recurso, yo les colaboro.